As we play through Amnesia: The Dark Descent and find ourselves immersed in its story, we often gloss over the many loading screens that give us bits of information about Daniel's past and the situation at hand. Each message helps players paint a better picture of Amnesia's lore by providing small but important details about critical events leading up to the game. Although Amnesia's simplicity has led it to be known by today's standards as a walking simulator, it never hurts to stop and smell the roses. Shown here are all of the loading screen messages that are displayed through the game. They are categorized by the section of levels they display in as you progress through the game, and each category is given a theme through its artwork and repeated ideas. I am not going to analyze each and every one of these, but instead I will pick out the ones most crucial to the story. In this video, I will be diving into the first 5 sections to uncover the deep messages hidden in their subtext. The main reference I am using here is the Amnesia Wiki, and like before, my sources will be pasted into the description. Much of this video will be speculation, and I may at times peer too deeply into it, so please use the comments section as an open discussion board about this. One more thing. This video assumes you have already seen my Amnesia's Lore Explained video. If you haven't done that yet, I recommend it. And here we go. First up is the rose on the floor. These loading screens appear in both the opening and closing segments of the game. The main idea presented in this section is information about Daniel's past, namely his family life. We are given inferences about Daniel's parents, and we're also introduced to Daniel's sister, Hazel. None of these characters ever appear in the game or receive any direct characterization, which makes it all the more interesting. He fell to the kitchen floor. Tears were beginning to well in his eyes as he received the first kick in his stomach. Hazel remained hidden, in fear she too would be punished. The he in this passage denotes a third-person perspective, and it is nearly certain that Daniel is the subject of this sentence. The quote, "tears were beginning to well in his eyes as he felt the first kick in his stomach," shows he's facing a sort of beating. Hazel remaining hidden reveals this is not the first time this took place. Punishment is a key word here, giving us some insight into Daniel's neglectful childhood. Daniel's abusive childhood household could have led to the fears he experiences in the game, namely nyctophobia, fear of the dark, and necrophobia, fear of dead bodies. It could also explain his timid characteristics, which we see through his cautiousness with Herbert and blind trust in Alexander. It is still not clear from this quote whether or not Daniel and Hazel are in their parents' household or a foster home, but I don't think it matters all too much. Not only did Daniel have trouble at home, but he also seemed to have a rough life at school. The other children cheered him on, his name voiced in a steadily rising pace, urging him to do it. Am I really doing this? The young boy thought, and struck his victim with a rock. This quote paints a scene where Daniel is facing another schoolmate, winning his fight, and is going to give his final blow. He is being pressured by his peers, but the curiosity here is his questioning of it. This is perhaps because he knows how it feels to be on the other end of the fight, and he feels he's better than the act he's about to commit. He does it anyway, and we're left without a reaction. We're not given much more information about Daniel's early life, and instead we're jumped straight to what I assume is his adolescence or early adulthood. Later in his life as Daniel is traveling, he pays a visit to his family. The sense of obligation he had for this is a common trait among abused children, as they become hyper-attached to the people taking care of them, even if those same people riddled them with physical and psychological harm. Daniel's guilt, as we know, plays a major role in Amnesia's lore, as it is the main force that drove him to drink the amnesia potion and kill Alexander. There are mysteries hidden in the other messages which offer us questions about unrevealed characters, like these two. Another lone soul in London seemed appropriate to Daniel, as he grew to see life as a bleak setting. From his neglectful childhood to unemployment, it was unfortunately the path he landed on. As for the second one, we are given our first taste of Alexander's perspective. Who is Friend referring to? Could it be any of his colleagues from the Order, or just Daniel? The artwork for this set of quotes is very much a reflection of the feeling of lost hope, sadness, abandonment, and abuse. The rose on the ground signifies the death of something that was once so vivid and adored, but was beaten and left to rot. However, the seeds of which contained a shimmer of hope for Daniel's future, like that of the orb. The second set of loading screens appear as you move into the first hub section of the game, the entrance hall. Nearly all of the loading messages contained here pertain to Daniel's journey in Algeria, his entrapment into the tomb of Tin Hinan, and the true beginning of Amnesia's storyline. Daniel, Herbert, and their crew were on a mission to uncover the monumental tomb of Tin Hinan, a mythical Tuareg queen in the 4th century. Disaster strikes, and Daniel becomes trapped in its great antechamber. But this is mentioned in diaries rather than loading screens. Unfortunately, I missed the detail of Tin Hinan in my Amnesia Through History video, so I thought I'd include that here. It is mentioned in Daniel's journal entry for the 16th of May 1839, which is the first one found in the archives, that he is doing this to obtain artifacts for the British Museum. It seems from this that Daniel had found work and someone to look up to, Herbert. From this point on, Herbert becomes a major part of the story. He's discussed more soon. The Tents in the Desert details Daniel's trek out of Algeria after he was trapped and found the orb. This time was stressful for Daniel since he was experiencing confusion and exhaustion. The orb was the centerpiece of his thoughts as he worked hard to understand its properties. It became impossible to avoid. The commotion in the streets begged for his attention. As he opened the shutters, the French soldiers opened fire on the 2 young men fighting back, their voices silenced in a haze of gunsmoke. There's some more depth in this quote and a possible historical perspective. To understand the commotion, I began by looking up a map of Africa in 1839 and researched the situation in Algeria at the time. Since Amnesia's backstory takes place in the late 1830s, the presence of the French in the Sahara is relevant. According to this source from Oxford Bibliographies, the main period of colonial expansion came during the so-called Scramble for Africa and the establishment of protectorates in Tunisia and Morocco in the decades before the First World War. This tells me that during that time there was a lot of conflict in northern Africa for rule of territory, including rebellious nationalist groups. Daniel and his crew, as they're making their trek to British territory in northern Africa, come past a group of rebels and French soldiers fighting, and the soldiers sending their final blow against the fighters, and silencing them in a haze of gunsmoke. However, it doesn't end there. After enduring 3 days in Algiers, a sailboat was finally arranged to take him across the Mediterranean Sea to Gibraltar. Having reached British territory, it was just a matter of reserving a cabin on SS Hortensia, headed for London. These quotes appear only in rooms containing the Cairn, also known as the water monster. What I can assume from the first quote is Daniel falling overboard into the ocean from his sleep at night while on the SS Hortensia. Daniel struggling to make sense of the situation tells me he could have been sleepwalking. Although I can't be sure why this happened, the shadow could already have been communicating with him across the void. Or it could have just been his exhaustion taking a toll on him. Nonetheless, it was a rough journey back home for Daniel.